groceries. She lived simply, worked tirelessly, and carried herself with quiet dignity. But on this day, everything changed. The sound of sirens cut through the calm, stopping conversations mid-sentence. 2 police cars pulled up to her modest home, lights flashing against the cracked sidewalk. At first, the neighbors thought it must be a mistake. Sarah? No. Not her. She was the one who braided little girls' hair before Sunday service, the one who stayed late at the community center teaching kids to read. Yet the officers walked straight to her door. Sarah Johnson, one asked sharply as she stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands after baking bread for a widow down the street. Before she could respond, cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. Gasps echoed from the small crowd gathering nearby. "What's going on?" Mrs. Evans, an elderly neighbor, cried out. "This can't be right," shouted a young man Sarah once helped find a job. But their voices were drowned out by the accusations. Words like theft and fraud were spoken aloud, slicing through the trust she had built over decades. Sarah's face did not crumble, though her heart did. She stood tall as the officers led her past the people she loved, her chin trembling but lifted. Inside, she was breaking. To be accused of betraying the very community she had sacrificed for, it felt like being cast out of her own life. Whispers followed her as she was pushed into the police car. Some eyes filled with disbelief, others with suspicion. And in that moment, Sarah felt something she had never felt before in her neighborhood: isolation. The car door slammed shut. The world she knew, the children, the laughter, the meals shared, the prayers whispered, faded behind her. All that remained was the weight of injustice pressing down, stripping away her dignity in front of those who once called her family. And so began Sarah's long journey, not just to prove her innocence, but to rediscover the strength of compassion in a world quick to judge. The cell was colder than Sarah imagined. Not just in temperature, but in spirit. The walls, chipped and gray, seemed to close in with every hour. She sat on a narrow bench, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor as if the answers to her life's unraveling might be written there. For the first time in years, her world was silent. No knock at the door from a neighbor needing help. No laughter from children tugging at her skirt. No church choir humming in the background of her Sunday mornings. Just silence. Heavy. Accusing. At night, Sarah replayed her life in fragments. The soup she delivered to Mr. Jenkins during the winter storm. The clothes she collected for the single mother on the corner. The tutoring sessions where little hands scribbled letters until they finally formed words. Her entire life had been built on giving, on lifting others when they were weak. And now? No one could lift her. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with questions. Why me? Who would want to destroy me? What if no one believes the truth? Each question dug deeper, scraping at the faith she had carried for so long. On the third night, she pressed her forehead against the cold bars and whispered, "Lord, I have loved them all my life. Why have they turned away?" Her voice cracked, echoing back to her as if even the walls could not answer. The guards rarely spoke. The other inmates mostly watched, curious about the woman who carried herself with such quiet grace, even in chains. Some mocked her under their breath. Others kept their distance. Sarah, who had always been surrounded by people, had never felt so alone. Yet in the silence, she noticed something else, a spark that refused to die. Each time doubt rose up, she remembered a face she had touched, a life she had made better. Surely, she thought, someone remembers who I truly am. It was a fragile hope, but it was all she had. In that bleak cell, Sarah learned a painful truth. When the world turns its back, silence can either crush you or carve out the space for strength. And though she felt abandoned, somewhere deep inside, she knew her story was not over. Days blurred into weeks, and Sarah's case seemed to fade into the background of the busy city. For many, she had become nothing more than a headline, community woman accused of fraud. The people who once leaned on her now carried on with their lives, some avoiding her name altogether, others whispering doubts about whether kindness had only been a mask. But not everyone forgot. Miles away, in a cramped newsroom office, a young journalist named Daniel Harris stumbled upon the case file while scrolling through reports. The name leapt out at him, Sarah Johnson. His breath caught. He knew that name. Years ago, Daniel had been a boy from a struggling household, angry at the world, slipping into trouble. Sarah had been the one who stopped him in the hallway of the community center, placing a hand on his shoulder when others looked away. She had given him books, snacks, and words he would never forget. "You are more than your mistakes." Daniel leaned back in his chair. Sarah Johnson accused of fraud? No. That wasn't the woman who had pulled him out of despair. Something was wrong. Fueled by memory and gratitude, he began digging. At first, it was just checking old records, making a few calls. But soon he uncovered oddities, missing documents, evidence that didn't add up, names that appeared in places they shouldn't. The deeper he went, the clearer it became: Sarah wasn't guilty. She was being framed. It wasn't easy. His editor warned him not to get personally involved. Friends told him to drop it. Why risk his young career over someone already condemned in the public eye? But Daniel couldn't forget the woman who once saw worth in him when no one else did. Late one night, after hours of sifting through papers, he found the thread he needed: proof that money Sarah was accused of stealing had never passed through her accounts at all. Someone had used her name. Someone wanted her destroyed. With shaking hands, Daniel knew what he had to do. He would fight for her. He owed her that much. In the silence of her cell, Sarah had no idea that far beyond those prison walls, a spark of loyalty had been lit. A boy she once saved had grown into a man willing to save her. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Reporters scribbled in their notepads, neighbors shifted nervously in their seats, and Sarah sat quietly at the defense table, hands folded, her eyes lowered but her spirit unbroken. Weeks in jail had etched lines of exhaustion across her face, yet there was still dignity in her posture, a quiet refusal to be defeated. Across from her, the prosecution painted her as a manipulator, someone who had used her reputation for kindness as a mask to cover greed. Each word cut deep, and Sarah wondered if anyone in the room remembered who she truly was. Then Daniel rose. The young journalist, now turned advocate, carried a file in his trembling hands. He wasn't a lawyer by trade, but with the support of Sarah's appointed attorney, he had been allowed to present new evidence. He glanced at Sarah, and in that look was every ounce of gratitude he had carried since boyhood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," Daniel began, his voice steady though his heart raced. "I stand here not just with evidence, but with truth. Sarah Johnson is not the woman the prosecution describes. She is the woman who fed the hungry, clothed the poor, and lifted children like me out of despair. And the records will show, she could not have committed the crime she's accused of." He laid out the documents, pointing to the trail of money that proved her innocence. The funds had been funneled through shell accounts tied to a local businessman, someone with both the power and motive to destroy Sarah's credibility. Each page he displayed stripped away the lies that had bound her. But what broke the courtroom's silence wasn't just the evidence, it was the voices that followed. One by one, members of the community stood. An elderly woman spoke of the night Sarah brought her medicine in a storm. A young mother recalled how Sarah had cared for her children when she had no one else. Even the young man Sarah had once mentored, now employed and thriving, stood to testify. It was no longer a trial about theft, it had become a testament to the power of one woman's kindness. Sarah sat still, tears welling in her eyes, as the courtroom shifted from suspicion to compassion. The walls of judgment began to crumble, replaced by a chorus of voices declaring her truth. For the first time since her arrest, Sarah felt the weight lift. She was not alone. The jury filed back into the courtroom, faces solemn. The room fell silent, every breath held. Sarah